Victoria. Chun's breath stopped as she stared at the doctoral level equations covering her 8-year-old daughter's bedroom floor, mathematics that should have been impossible when the building's janitor solved them in under a minute. His whispered confession about the gifted student he'd destroyed would force Victoria to risk everything she'd fought to protect. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. That's impossible. The words escaped Victoria Chun's lips as barely more than a whisper, but they echoed through the pristine silence of her daughter's bedroom like a thunderclap. She stood frozen in the doorway, her briefcase still clutched in one hand, her designer coat dripping melted snow onto the hardwood floor. She had come home early for once, hoping to surprise her daughter with takeout from that expensive sushi place Emma always begged for. Instead, she was the one receiving the surprise, and it was the kind that made her question whether she was losing her mind. Emma, her 8-year-old daughter, sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by what looked like a hurricane of papers. But these weren't the typical drawings of unicorns or houses with smiling suns that most third graders produced. These were covered in mathematical equations so complex that Victoria, who held an MBA from Wharton and had built a tech empire from nothing, couldn't begin to decipher them. Numbers and symbols cascaded across the pages in Emma's careful, childish handwriting. Derivatives, integrals, Greek letters that Victoria vaguely remembered from her required college calculus course, the one she'd barely passed before deciding that finance was more her speed. Emma looked up at her mother with those wide, innocent brown eyes, a pencil tucked behind her ear and another one in her hand. "Hi, Mommy, you're home early." Her voice was light, casual, as if she'd been caught playing with dolls instead of apparently solving equations that would make a graduate student weep. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "What?" she finally managed, her voice tight with confusion. "What is all this, Emma?" "Oh, just some problems I've been working on." Emma picked up one of the papers and held it up proudly, the way another child might display a finger painting destined for the refrigerator. "See? I figured out how to prove this theorem. It was really tricky, but once I saw the pattern, it just made sense." Victoria took a step closer, her heels clicking against the floor. She knelt down, her expensive wool coat pooling around her, and picked up one of the papers with trembling fingers. The equations looked like a foreign language, an alien script that her daughter had somehow learned to speak fluently. "Where did you learn this?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "Did someone teach you this? Is there something at school?" Emma shook her head, her ponytail swishing. "No, Mommy. School is easy. We're doing multiplication tables. That's boring. I found these problems online. There's this website with old university exams and I've been solving them." She said it with the same nonchalance she might use to describe watching cartoons. Victoria felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. University exams. Her 8-year-old daughter was solving university-level mathematics for fun while she was at the office, working 16-hour days to keep Chun Technologies at the cutting edge of artificial intelligence development. "How long?" she asked, her throat tight. "How long have you been doing this?" Emma thought for a moment, tapping the pencil against her chin. "I don't know. Maybe since I was 6. I started with the easier stuff first. Addition and subtraction were too simple, so I looked up harder things. The internet is really helpful, Mommy, since she was 6. Victoria's mind reeled. For 2 years, her daughter had been secretly teaching herself advanced mathematics while Victoria had been too consumed by quarterly reports and investor meetings to notice. The guilt hit her like a physical blow, followed immediately by a wave of disbelief so strong it made her dizzy. This couldn't be real. Children didn't just teach themselves calculus and whatever else these papers represented, did they? She looked at her daughter, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in months. Emma's face was bright with enthusiasm, completely unaware of the earthquake she'd just triggered in her mother's understanding of reality. There was a smudge of pencil lead on her cheek, and her school uniform was rumpled from sitting on the floor for what must have been hours. She looked like a normal 8-year-old child, except for the doctoral level mathematics scattered around her like autumn leaves. "Emma, honey," Victoria said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the chaos in her mind. "I need you to explain something to me. Can you tell me what this equation means?" She pointed to one that looked particularly intimidating, a string of symbols and numbers that seemed to go on forever. Emma's face lit up with the pure joy of a child asked to explain her favorite thing in the world. "Oh, that's a partial differential equation. It's used to describe how things change over time and space. Like if you want to know how heat spreads through a metal rod, or how waves move through water. See, this part here represents the rate of change, and this part describes the boundary conditions." She continued talking, her small voice growing more animated as she traced her finger across the paper, explaining concepts that Victoria couldn't follow even when they were filtered through a child's simple language. She watched her daughter's face, saw the pure intellectual excitement there, and felt a strange mix of pride and terror blooming in her chest. This was her child, this brilliant, impossible child who had somehow hidden this extraordinary gift for 2 years while Victoria had been too busy building her empire to notice. When Emma finally finished her explanation, she looked up at her mother expectantly, waiting for praise or approval or perhaps just acknowledgement that what she'd done was special. Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came out. "What do you say when your 8-year-old daughter casually reveals she's been operating at the intellectual level of a doctoral candidate? How do you process the fact that you've been living with a prodigy and never knew it?" it. That's very impressive, sweetheart, Victoria finally managed, her voice sounding hollow even to her own ears. The words were inadequate, laughably so, but they were all she could muster. Have you shown this to anyone? Your teacher? Your father? Emma's face fell slightly at the mention of her father. Daddy doesn't really like math, she said quietly. He says it's boring and that I should play outside more, and my teacher just gives me extra worksheets when I finish early, but they're all baby stuff, so I just do this at home. It's my secret. A secret. Victoria's heart clenched. Her daughter had kept this magnificent, impossible talent a secret because she thought no one would care, because her teacher didn't understand, and her father dismissed it, and her mother was never home long enough to notice. The guilt intensified, mixing with a growing sense of urgency. This wasn't something that could be ignored or dismissed. This was real, and it was extraordinary, and it needed to be understood. I need to make a phone call, Victoria said, standing up abruptly. Her mind was already racing through possibilities. Who did you call when your 8-year-old daughter might be a mathematical genius? A child psychologist? A university professor? The school principal? She pulled out her phone, then hesitated, staring at the screen blankly. Emma, I want you to keep working on this, but I'm going to have someone come and look at these papers. Someone who understands this better than I do. Is that okay? Emma nodded eagerly. Can they bring me harder problems? These ones are getting easy. Victoria felt another wave of unreality wash over her. These problems that she couldn't comprehend, that looked like they belonged in a graduate seminar, were getting easy for her 8-year-old daughter. She stumbled out of the room, her hands shaking as she scrolled through her contacts. She needed an expert. She needed someone who could tell her whether this was real or whether she'd somehow slipped into an alternate universe where children casually solved equations that would stump professors. She found the name she was looking for, Dr. Richard Huang, a mathematics professor at Columbia University who sat on the advisory board for one of her company's AI projects. He'd know what to do. He'd be able to look at Emma's work and tell her whether this was genuine genius or some kind of elaborate copying that Victoria didn't understand. She pressed the call button, her heart hammering in her chest. The phone rang 3 times before a cultured voice answered. Victoria Chun, this is a surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure? Richard, Victoria said, her voice more urgent than she'd intended. I need your help. It's about my daughter. I need you to look at some mathematical work she's been doing, tonight if possible. There was a pause. Of course, Richard said, his tone shifting from casual to concern. Is everything all right? Victoria looked back toward Emma's room where she could see her daughter still sitting on the floor, now adding more equations to a fresh sheet of paper with focused concentration. I don't know, she said honestly. I really don't know. An hour later, Victoria stood in her living room, watching as Dr. Richard Huang knelt on the floor beside Emma, examining the papers spread out before them. He'd arrived within 40 minutes of her call, his curiosity apparently piqued enough to abandon his evening plans. He was a small man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and a permanent expression of intellectual intensity. He'd been looking at Emma's work in silence for 15 minutes now, occasionally picking up a page, examining it closely, then setting it down and picking up another. Victoria's hands were clenched so tightly at her sides that her nails were digging into her palms. Emma sat beside the professor, answering his questions in her clear, childish voice, explaining her reasoning and methods with an ease that was both wonderful and terrifying. The professor's face had progressed through several stages of emotion. Initial skepticism, mild interest, growing surprise, and now what looked like genuine shock. Finally, he set down the last paper and removed his glasses, cleaning them with a handkerchief from his pocket. It was a gesture Victoria recognized as a delaying tactic, a way to buy time while his mind processed something difficult. When he finally looked up at her, his expression was grave. Mrs. Chun, he said quietly, may I speak with you privately for a moment? Victoria's stomach dropped. Of course. Emma, sweetie, why don't you go get ready for bed? It's late. Emma pouted but didn't argue. She gathered her papers carefully, shooting the professor a hopeful look. Did I do them right? Richard's stern expression softened. Yes, my dear. You did them very right indeed. Now, off you go. When Emma had disappeared into her room, Richard stood up, his movements slow and careful, like a man who'd just witnessed something that had fundamentally altered his understanding of the world. Victoria recognized that feeling. She'd been experiencing it for the past 2 hours. Well, she demanded, unable to bear the silence any longer. Is it real? Did she really solve those problems? Richard looked at her with an expression that was part wonder and part something that looked almost like fear. Mrs. Chun, he said slowly, your daughter didn't just solve those problems. Several of them were from doctoral qualification exams from MIT and Princeton. One of them was from a problem set I assigned to my graduate students just last semester. A problem set that had a 30% failure rate. Victoria felt the room spin slightly. But she's 8, I'm aware, Richard said. He began pacing, his hands clasped behind his back in a professorial gesture. Mrs. Chun, Victoria, I've been teaching mathematics for 40 years. I've seen bright students, brilliant students, prodigies who could solve complex problems at young ages. But this, he gestured toward Emma's room, this is different. The intuition she's displaying, the way she approached problems. It's not just memorization or pattern recognition. She's actually understanding the underlying concepts at a fundamental level. What does that mean? Victoria asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. It means, Richard said, meeting her eyes directly, that your daughter is quite possibly one of the most gifted mathematical minds I've ever encountered. And I've encountered several Fields Medal winners in my career. The words hung in the air between them, solid and undeniable. Victoria sank onto the couch, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. This wasn't just a bright child who was good at math. This was something else entirely. Something extraordinary, something that changed everything. What do I do? She whispered. Richard sat down across from her, his expression thoughtful. First, we need to have her formally tested by specialists in childhood giftedness. We need to understand the full scope of her abilities. But Mrs. Chun, I'm going to be frank with you. A gift like this, it's a tremendous blessing, but also a tremendous responsibility. She needs specialized education, mentorship, careful guidance, and she needs protection. Protection? Victoria looked up sharply. From what? Richard's expression darkened. From people who would exploit her. From institutions that would turn her into a curiosity or a research subject. From the weight of expectations that could crush a child. From the isolation that often comes with being so different from her peers. Victoria felt cold. She'd built a company from nothing. She'd navigated hostile takeovers, cutthroat competition, and boardroom politics. But none of that had prepared her for this. None of it had prepared her to be the mother of a child prodigy. She thought of all the late nights at the office. All the parent-teacher conferences she'd missed. All the times she'd been too tired to really pay attention when Emma tried to tell her about her day. The guilt threatened to overwhelm her. The morning after Dr. Huang's visit, Victoria Chun sat in her corner office on the 42nd floor of the Chun Technologies building, staring at the city spread out before her like a glittering circuit board. She hadn't slept. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those equations in her daughter's handwriting, heard Richard's voice saying, one of the most gifted mathematical minds I've ever encountered. The words played on an endless loop in her mind, each repetition adding another layer of weight to her shoulders. Her assistant, Marcus, had already brought in her usual morning coffee, extra shot of espresso, no sugar. It sat untouched on her desk, growing cold while she wrestled with a problem that couldn't be solved with venture capital or aggressive marketing strategies. Her phone buzzed with the 100th email of the morning. Another crisis demanding her immediate attention, but for once in her career. Victoria Chun couldn't bring herself to care about profit margins or product launches. She had a daughter who could solve doctoral level mathematics. A daughter who'd been hiding this extraordinary gift like a shameful secret because the adults in her life had been too busy or too dismissive to see it. Victoria pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to push back the headache that had been building since last night. What kind of mother doesn't notice that her child is a genius? The knock on her door was soft but insistent. "Come in!" Victoria called, not bothering to hide the exhaustion in her voice. Marcus poked his head in, his expression concerned. "Your 9 o'clock is here, Doctor. Patricia Morrison from the Gifted Children's Institute. Shall I send her in?" Victoria had forgotten about that meeting, though she'd been the one to arrange it at 3 in the morning when sleep had proved impossible. "Yes, please. And Marcus, hold all my other calls. This is priority, Doctor." Morrison was a tall woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an air of unshakable competence. She carried a leather portfolio and wore a simple navy suit that suggested someone more interested in substance than style. She shook Victoria's hand firmly and settled into the chair across from the desk with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent decades dealing with anxious parents. "Mrs. Chun, thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Doctor. Huang briefed me on your daughter's situation. It sounds quite remarkable." Victoria felt a strange defensiveness rise in her chest. Remarkable wasn't the word she would have chosen. Terrifying, perhaps. Life-altering. World-shaking. "I need to know if what Richard saw is real," she said, cutting straight to the point. "I need to know what this means for Emma, Doctor." Morrison opened her portfolio and pulled out several documents. "I've reviewed copies of the work Dr. Huang sent me. I've also consulted with 2 other colleagues, both specialists in mathematical giftedness. Mrs. Chun, what your daughter is displaying is not just precocity. This is a level of abstract reasoning and mathematical intuition that we rarely see, even in adults. To find it in an 8-year-old child, well, there are perhaps a handful of documented cases in the last century." The words should have filled Victoria with pride. Instead, they filled her with dread. A handful of cases. She thought of child prodigies she'd read about in magazines, the ones who burned out by 20 or committed suicide or ended up broken by the weight of expectation. "What happens to children like this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Morrison's expression soft. "That depends entirely on the support system around them, with proper guidance, appropriate educational opportunities, and most importantly, emotional support. These children can thrive. They can make extraordinary contributions to their field, but it requires careful balance. They're still children, Mrs. Chun. They still need to play, to have friends, to develop socially and emotionally alongside their intellectual growth." Victoria thought of Emma sitting alone in her room, solving equations for fun because school was too boring and her parents were too absent. "I've failed her, haven't I?" The words escaped before she could stop them, raw and painful. Dr. Morrison leaned forward, her expression gentle but firm. "You're here now. You're seeking help. That's what matters. But I won't lie to you, Mrs. Chun. The road ahead is complicated. Emma will need specialized education. She'll need intellectual peers, even if they're much older than her. She'll need careful monitoring to ensure she doesn't develop perfectionism or anxiety. And she'll need her mother to be present in a way that perhaps you haven't been before." The criticism, delivered kindly but unmistakably, landed like a physical blow. Victoria had spent the last 8 years building an empire, proving to everyone who doubted her that a woman could lead a major tech company, that she could compete with the boys' club of Silicon Valley and win. She'd sacrificed everything for that success. Time with Emma, her marriage, which had crumbled under the weight of her ambition, her health, her friendships, everything. And now she was being told that the price of that success might be her daughter's well-being. "I can be present," Victoria said, though the words felt like a lie even as she spoke them. She looked at her desk, at the stack of contracts waiting for her signature, at her calendar showing back-to-back meetings from 9 to 7 every day for the next 3 weeks. How did other parents do this? How did they balance the demands of running a company with the needs of an extraordinary child? Dr. Morrison seemed to read her thoughts. "It will require changes," she said simply. "Significant one. But Mrs. Chun, I've worked with dozens of families in similar situations. The ones who succeed are the ones who recognize that their child's gift isn't just their child's to carry. It's a family responsibility. Everyone has to adjust." Victoria nodded slowly, her mind already racing through possibilities. She could delegate more at work. She could hire a tutor, the best one available. She could, what? What did a mother do when her 8-year-old needed resources that didn't exist in the normal world? "I want to arrange testing, doctor," Morrison continued. "Comprehensive psychological and educational assessments. We need to understand not just Emma's mathematical abilities, but her overall cognitive profile, her emotional state, her social development. Then we can create a plan. Would you be amenable to that?" "Yes," Victoria said immediately. "Whatever she needs. Cost isn't an object, doctor." Morrison's expression flickered with something that might have been disapproval. "Mrs. Chun, I appreciate your willingness to invest financially, but I need you to understand something. Your daughter doesn't need money. She needs you. She needs your time, your attention, your emotional presence. Those are things you can't delegate or buy." The words stung because they were true. Victoria had spent 8 years believing that providing for Emma financially was the same as being a good mother, that working herself to exhaustion to build a company that would one day secure Emma's future was an act of love. But Emma didn't need a trust fund. She needed a mother who came home for dinner, a mother who noticed when she was solving equations that would stump graduate students. "I understand," Victoria said quietly. "When can we start the testing?" Dr. Morrison pulled out her tablet and began scrolling through a calendar. "I can have our team available next week. The process will take several days, possibly longer. Will you be able to be present for all of it?" Victoria thought of the product launch scheduled for next week, the investor meeting she'd been planning for months, the keynote speech she was supposed to deliver at a tech conference. All of it suddenly seemed impossibly trivial compared to her daughter's needs. "Yes," she said, "I'll clear my schedule." After Dr. Morrison left, Victoria sat alone in her office, watching the morning sun climb higher over the city. Through her floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see other office buildings, other CEOs probably sitting in similar chairs, making similar calculations about profit and loss. None of them were dealing with what she was dealing with. Or maybe they were, and they were just better at hiding it. Her phone buzzed again. Another email, this one from her ex-husband David. The subject line read simply, "We need to talk about Emma." Victoria's jaw tightened. David had shown zero interest in Emma's intellectual development for years, dismissing her mathematical curiosity as weird and insisting she needed to be more normal. But of course, now that Richard had undoubtedly called, now that there was something remarkable to claim credit for, he suddenly wanted to talk. She opened the email reluctantly. The message was brief and typically David. "Heard about Emma's math thing. This is great news. I know some people at Princeton. We should push for early university admission. Get her into a good program. This could really set her up for success." Victoria felt rage bubble up in her chest, hot and acidic. This could set her up for success. As if Emma were a business venture to be optimized, a investment portfolio to be managed. David had always viewed their daughter through the lens of achievement and status. When Emma had been a normal kid, albeit a bright one, he'd lost interest. But a child prodigy? That was something he could brag about at cocktail parties. That was something that reflected well on it. She deleted the email without responding. David would have to wait. Right now, she had more important things to handle. She pulled up her calendar and began canceling meetings, sending apologetic emails to board members and investors. Each cancellation felt like a small act of rebellion against the life she'd built, the identity she'd constructed. Victoria Chun, CEO, titan of industry, woman who never said no to a business opportunity. That woman was going to have to learn to say no a lot more often. By lunchtime, she'd cleared her schedule for the next 2 weeks. Her assistant Marcus had looked at her like she'd lost her mind, but he'd executed her instructions without argument. That was what she paid him for. Now she sat in an eerily empty calendar, feeling both liberated and terrified. What did she do with this time? How did she fill the hours she usually spent in conference rooms and strategy sessions? She picked up her phone and called Emma's school. The secretary connected her to Mrs. Patterson, Emma's third-grade teacher. "Mrs. Chun, what a pleasant surprise," the teacher said, her voice warm but slightly wary. They'd interacted exactly 3 times in the school year, always brief conversations at pickup time. "What can I do for you?" "I need to talk to you about Emma," Victoria said. "About her schoolwork. Has she seemed, I don't know, bored? Unchallenged?" There was a pause. Mrs. Patterson's voice, when she spoke again, was carefully neutral. "Emma is a bright student, Mrs. Chun. She finishes her work quickly and accurately. I often give her extra worksheets to keep her occupied." "Extra worksheets of the same level?" Victoria pressed. "Well, yes. I don't want to push her too far ahead of her peers. It's important for her social development to stay with her age." Victoria closed her eyes. Even Emma's teacher, well-meaning as she was, had missed it. Or worse, had seen it and decided it was more important for Emma to be normal than to be challenged. Mrs. Patterson, I need to meet with you and the principal. Tomorrow, if possible. We need to discuss a new educational plan for Emma. The teacher's voice took on a defensive tone. Mrs. Chun, if this is about accelerating her grade, I really don't think that's in Emma's best interest. This isn't about skipping a grade, Victoria said, keeping her voice level despite her frustration. It's about making sure my daughter's needs are being met. I'll explain everything tomorrow. Can we meet at 8? After a reluctant agreement from Mrs. Patterson, Victoria ended the call and sat back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, a sound she'd never noticed before in all her years in this office. It was strange how much you missed when you were moving too fast to pay attention. She'd missed the hum of lights, the way the sun tracked across her floor throughout the day, and most devastatingly, the fact that her daughter was extraordinary. That evening, Victoria did something she hadn't done in over a year. She left the office at 5:30. Her driver looked shocked when she appeared in the lobby, her briefcase left behind on her desk, just her phone and her coat, like a normal person leaving a normal job. The drive home felt surreal. The streets clogged with rush hour traffic instead of the empty midnight roads she usually traveled. She watched other cars, wondering about the people inside them. Did they have secrets like hers? Did they have children at home solving impossible equations? Emma was in the kitchen when Victoria walked through the door, sitting at the table with Mrs. Rodriguez, their housekeeper who stayed late 3 days a week to make sure Emma ate dinner and did her homework. The older woman looked up in surprise, her eyebrows rising at the sight of Victoria home before dark. Mrs. Chun, is everything all right? Mrs. Rodriguez asked, already gathering her thing. I can stay if you need. Everything's fine, Victoria said, though she wasn't sure that was true. Thank you, Maria. I'll see you tomorrow. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Victoria stood awkwardly in her own kitchen, feeling like an intruder in her daughter's routine. Emma was eating macaroni and cheese from a bowl, a math textbook open beside her plate. Not a third-grade math textbook, Victoria noticed, but something far more advanced. She could see calculus problems on the pages, notes written in Emma's careful handwriting in the margins. Hi, Mommy, Emma said, not looking up from her book. You're home early again. Are you sick? The innocent question cut deeper than any boardroom criticism Victoria had ever received. Her daughter thought something must be wrong because her mother was home at a normal hour. What did that say about the life they'd been living? I'm not sick, sweetheart, Victoria said, pulling out a chair and sitting down across from Emma. I just wanted to have dinner. Was that okay? Emma finally looked up, her expression cautious and hopeful in equal measure. Really? You're not going back to the office? Not tonight, Victoria said, and felt the weight of that promise settle on her shoulders. She'd have to go back eventually. She had responsibilities, a company to run, hundreds of employees depending on her leadership. But tonight, Emma needed her more. Tell me about your day. Emma's face lit up and she launched into an enthusiastic description of her day that revealed just how bored and understimulated she was at school. They'd spent math class reviewing multiplication facts Emma had mastered when she was 6. During reading time, they'd read a book about a talking dog that Emma described as babyish. At lunch, the other kids had talked about a cartoon show Emma didn't watch because she preferred watching lectures about mathematics on YouTube. With each detail, Victoria's heart sank lower. Her daughter was intellectually isolated, living in a world where none of her peers could understand what excited her, what challenged her, what made her feel alive. And worse, she'd learned to hide it. She never mentioned the equations she solved at home. She never talked about the theorems she was working through. She'd created 2 separate lives, the normal 3rd grader at school and the mathematical prodigy at home. An 8-year-old child shouldn't have to compartmentalize like that. Emma, Victoria said when her daughter paused for breath, I talked to a very smart woman today, a doctor who helps children like you, children who are very good at things, sometimes better than adults. Emma's expression became guarded, a look that made her seem older than her 8 years. Am I in trouble? Is it bad that I do math? No, baby, no, Victoria said quickly, reaching across the table to take Emma's small hand. You're not in trouble. You're brilliant. What you can do? It's amazing. I just want to make sure you're getting help and support to do even more amazing things. But Emma didn't look reassured. She looked scared. I don't want to be different, Mommy. The kids at school already think I'm weird. If they know about the math, they'll think I'm even weirder. Victoria felt her heart crack. This was what happened when you let a gifted child navigate their difference alone. They learn to see it as something shameful, something to hide rather than celebrate. She came around the table and knelt beside Emma's chair, taking both of her daughter's hands. Listen to me, Victoria said, looking directly into Emma's eyes. Being smart is not weird. Being able to do things other people can't do is not something to be ashamed of. It's a gift. And yes, it might mean you're different from other kids your age, but different isn't bad. Different is just as different. Emma's eyes filled with tears. But I want to be normal. I want to have friends who understand me. I want to talk about the things I'm thinking about, but when I try, everyone looks at me like I'm speaking another language. Victoria pulled her daughter into her arms, feeling Emma's small body shake with suppressed sobs. She felt her own tears threatening to fall. How many nights had Emma cried like this while Victoria was at the office dealing with problems that suddenly seemed so trivial? How many times had her daughter needed comfort and found only an empty house and a housekeeper who was kind but couldn't understand what Emma was going through? I know it's hard, Victoria whispered into Emma's hair. I know you feel alone, but you're not going to be alone anymore. I promise. We're going to find you teachers who can challenge you. We're going to find other kids who think like you do. And I'm going to be here. I'm going to actually be here, not just physically present, but really here. Emma pulled back, wiping her eyes. But what about your job? You always say the company needs you. The company will survive without me working 80 hours a week, Victoria said. And as she spoke the words, she realized they were true. Chun Technologies had good people, strong leadership below her. She'd built it that way precisely so it could function without her micromanaging every decision. She'd just been too afraid to let go, too convinced that her worth was tied to her constant presence in the office. But you need me more than they do, and I should have realized that a long time ago. They ate dinner together, really ate together, without Victoria checking her phone every 30 seconds or mentally drafting emails while Emma talked. Afterward, they sat in the living room and Emma showed her mother some of the mathematics she'd been working on. Victoria didn't understand most of it, but she listened with genuine interest, asking questions and letting Emma's enthusiasm wash over her like a tide. For the first time in years, she saw her daughter fully engaged, fully herself, unguarded and glowing with intellectual passion. Later, after she'd tucked Emma into bed and read her a story, something she usually left to Mrs. Rodriguez, Victoria sat in her home office, staring at her laptop screen. The emails had piled up, dozens of them marked urgent, demanding her attention. She ignored them and instead began researching schools for gifted children, mathematics competitions for young people, mentorship programs. The world of childhood giftedness was vast and complex, filled with opportunities and pitfalls in equal measure. She found stories of children like Emma who'd thrive, who'd gone on to make groundbreaking discoveries and live fulfilling lives. But she also found cautionary tales. Children pushed too hard, too fast. Prodigies who'd burned out before they reached adulthood. Gifted kids who'd been socially isolated and developed crippling anxiety. The more she read, the more she understood the delicate balance required. Emma needed challenge, but she also needed childhood. She needed intellectual peers, but she also needed age-appropriate social experiences. She needed to be pushed to grow, but also protected from being exploited or overwhelmed. It was well past midnight when Victoria finally closed her laptop, her eyes burning with exhaustion. She walked to Emma's room and stood in the doorway, watching her daughter sleep. Emma's face in sleep was peaceful, innocent, still so young despite the extraordinary mind behind those closed eyes. On the nightstand beside her bed was a notebook, and Victoria could see the edge of an equation scribbled on the open page. Even in her downtime, even preparing for sleep, Emma's mind was working on problems that would challenge adults. "I'm going to do better," Victoria whispered to her sleeping daughter. "I'm going to be the mother you deserve. I don't know how yet, but I'll figure it out." The next morning, Victoria arrived at Emma's school 15 minutes early for her meeting with Mrs. Patterson and Principal Howard. The elementary school was a private institution that cost $40,000 a year, with pristine hallways and state-of-the-art facilities. Victoria had chosen it because of its reputation and its test scores, but now she wondered if she'd been looking at the wrong metric. What good was a fancy school if it couldn't recognize or nurture a child like Emma? Mrs. F. Patterson and Principal Howard were already waiting in the principal's office when Victoria was shown in. Principal Howard was a distinguished-looking man in his 50s with silver hair and a politician's smile. Mrs. Patterson looked nervous, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Victoria took a seat across from them, placing her briefcase on the floor beside her. "Thank you for meeting with me on such short notice," Victoria began. "I wanted to discuss Emma's educational needs and some recent discoveries about her ability." Principal Howard leaned back in his chair, his expression patient but slightly condescending. "Mrs. Chun, I assure you our curriculum is quite rigorous. Emma is doing excellently in all her subjects. Her test scores are consistently in the 99th percentile. That's precisely the problem," Victoria said calmly. "She's in the 99th percentile because your tests aren't challenging enough to measure her true abilities." She pulled several papers from her briefcase, copies of the equations Dr. Huang had examined. "Emma solved these last week for fun." She passed the papers across the desk. Principal Howard picked them up, his expression polite interest transforming into confusion as he examined them. Mrs. Patterson leaned over to look as well, her eyes widened. "I don't understand," Principal Howard said slowly. "What are these?" "Those are doctoral-level mathematics problems from MIT and Princeton," Victoria explained. "My daughter, your third-grade student, solved them correctly. She taught herself advanced calculus and partial differential equations by watching online lectures because her schoolwork was too easy." The room fell into stunned silence. Mrs. Patterson's face had gone pale, and Principal Howard was staring at the papers as if they might suddenly make sense if he looked at them long enough. "Moran's Chun," Principal Howard finally said, his voice uncertain. "If what you're saying is true, this is unprecedented. I've been in education for 30 years and I've never encountered anything like this." "It's true," Victoria said. "I've had her work verified by Dr. Richard Huang from Columbia University and Dr. Patricia Morrison from the Gifted Children's Institute. Emma is profoundly gifted and your school is failing her." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Mrs. Patterson looked stricken, her hand pressed to her chest as if Victoria had physically struck her. Principal Howard's politician's smile had vanished entirely, replaced by an expression that cycled between defensiveness and genuine shock. Victoria watched them both, feeling a surge of anger she hadn't expected. These were the people she'd trusted with her daughter's education. These were the professionals who were supposed to recognize potential and nurture it. Instead, they'd been giving Emma extra worksheets of third-grade math while she secretly solved equations that would challenge graduate students. "Mrs. Chun," Principal Howard said, recovering some of his composure. That's a very serious accusation. Our teachers are highly qualified professionals. If Emma has been, he gestured vaguely at the papers, doing this level of work, why didn't she show anyone? Why didn't you inform us? Victoria felt her jaw tight. Because she's 8 years old and she thought it was something to hide. Because she learned that being different made her weird. Because every time she finished her work early, you gave her more of the same instead of challenging her to grow. And as for why I didn't inform you, I didn't know until 2 days ago. I was too busy working to notice what was happening in my own home. The self-recrimination in her voice must have been evident because Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Chun, I had no idea. Emma never indicated that she was capable of this level of work. She's so quiet in class. Always compliant. She does her assignments and reads during free time. There were no signs. That's exactly the problem, Victoria said, leaning forward. A child like Emma has learned to mask her abilities because standing out feels dangerous. She's been managing her own giftedness with no support, no guidance, no acknowledgement. That's not just a failure of parenting. It's a failure of the entire system that's supposed to nurture exceptional children. Principal Howard cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. What exactly are you proposing, Mrs. Chun? We don't have a program for, he gestured at the papers again. For this, our most advanced mathematics instruction is 5th grade level, and even that's reserved for students who've demonstrated consistent excellence. I'm proposing that we create a program, Victoria said. Emma needs individualized instruction in mathematics, probably from a university professor or someone with advanced expertise. She needs social opportunities with intellectual peers, even if those peers are chronologically older. And she needs psychological support to help her navigate the isolation that comes with being profoundly different from her classmates. Mrs. Patterson exchanged a glance with Principal. Howard and Victoria could read the subtext clearly. What you're asking for is expensive. What you're asking for is complicated. What you're asking for is outside our experience. She felt her frustration mounting. This was a school that charged $40,000 a year per student. They had Olympic-sized swimming pools and theater programs and language immersion classes, but they couldn't figure out how to support one gifted child. I understand this is unconventional, Victoria said, moderating her tone with effort. I'm not expecting you to have all the answers immediately, but I need you to understand that Emma cannot continue in her current situation. If this school cannot provide what she needs, I'll find one that can. It was a threat, thinly veiled, and they all knew it. The loss of a Chun family tuition would be one thing, but the public relations nightmare of Victoria, Chun publicly stating that the prestigious Westbrook Academy couldn't accommodate her daughter's needs, would be far more damaging. Principal Howard seemed to recognize this immediately. His expression shifted, becoming more conciliatory. Of course, we want to work with you on this, Mrs. Chun, he said smoothly. Give us a few days to consult with our board and our educational specialists. We'll put together a proposal for Emma's individualized education plan. In the meantime, perhaps Mrs. Patterson could provide Emma with more advanced materials? Mrs. Patterson nodded eagerly, clearly relieved to have something concrete to offer. I can speak with our curriculum coordinator. We might have some 6th or 7th grade mathematics texts that would be more appropriate, or perhaps some enrichment materials from our gifted and talented program. Victoria wanted to laugh at the absurdity. 7th grade math for a child doing doctoral level work. It was like offering a concert pianist a beginner's practice book, but it was better than nothing, and she recognized that real change would take time. Fine, she said, but I expect a comprehensive plan within 1 week, and I'll be monitoring Emma's daily experience very closely. If I sense that she's being treated as a problem or a curiosity rather than a student, we'll be having another conversation. After the meeting, Victoria sat in her car in the school parking lot, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. The adrenaline from the confrontation was fading, leaving behind exhaustion and uncertainty. She'd fought for Emma in that office, but was fighting enough? The school clearly didn't have the resources or expertise to truly serve her daughter. Maybe she needed to look at specialized schools for gifted children. Maybe she needed to consider homeschooling with private tutors. Maybe she needed to completely append their lives to give Emma what she needed. Her phone rang, pulling her from her spiraling thoughts. Dr. Morrison's name appeared on the screen. Victoria answered immediately, desperate for guidance from someone who actually understood this world. Mrs. Chun, Dr. Morrison said, her voice calm and professional. I wanted to update you on the testing schedule. We've assembled a team of specialists who can evaluate Emma starting this Friday. The process will take approximately 3 days, and we'll need you to be present for at least part of each day to provide context and consent for various assessments. Friday works, Victoria said, mentally canceling another week's worth of meeting. What exactly will they be testing? We'll do a comprehensive cognitive assessment, IQ testing across multiple domains, achievement tests in mathematics specifically, and psychological evaluations to assess her emotional and social development. We'll also want to observe her problem-solving processes in real time. The goal is to get a complete picture of who Emma is, not just what she can do mathematically. Victoria appreciated the distinction. Who Emma is. Not just a brain to be measured and categorized, but a whole child with needs and fears and dreams. And after the testing, what happens then? Then we sit down with you and create a plan, Doctor, Morrison said. Educational recommendations. therapeutic support if needed, strategies for social development. We'll also connect you with other families who have profoundly gifted children. You'd be surprised how helpful it can be to talk with parents who understand what you're going through. The thought of other parents who understood was oddly comforting. Victoria had spent so much of her life being exceptional, being the only woman in boardrooms full of men, being the youngest CEO in her industry. She'd worn her uniqueness like armor, but this was different. This wasn't about her, it was about Emma. And for Emma's sake, Victoria needed to learn from people who'd walked this path before her. "Thank you," Victoria said, and meant it. "I'll have Emma ready on Friday. Is there anything I should do to prepare her?" "Just explain that she'll be meeting with some very nice people who want to understand how she thinks, Doc." Morrison said, "Make it sound interesting rather than scary. And Mrs. Chun, try not to be anxious. Children pick up on parental stress. If you're worried, she'll be worried." After ending the call, Victoria drove not to her office but home. It was only 10:30 in the morning, but she'd promised herself she would be present, and that meant actually being in the same physical space as her daughter. Mrs. Rodriguez looked surprised when Victoria walked through the door. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Chun?" the housekeeper asked, concern evident in her voice. "Everything's fine," Victoria assured her. "I'm just working from home today. Is Emma still here or did she go to school?" "She went to school," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "But Mrs. Chun, she seemed sad this morning. She asked if you would be home when she got back. I told her I didn't know." The guilt stabbed fresh and sharp. "Tell her I'll be here," Victoria said. "When she comes home today, I'll be here. From now on, I'll be here most days." Merce. Rodriguez's expression softened into something that looked like approval. "That's good, Mrs. Chun. Emma is a good girl, but she's been very lonely. A child needs her mother." The simple statement carried no judgment, just stating a fact that Victoria had been trying to deny for years. She nodded, unable to trust her voice, and retreated to her home office. But instead of opening her laptop to the endless stream of work emails, she opened a notebook and began writing. She made lists of questions to ask Dr. Morrison, notes on schools she'd researched the night before, ideas for how to restructure her work schedule, plans for spending more time with Emma. The afternoon stretched out before her, strange and unstructured. She wasn't used to having hours with nothing scheduled, no meetings to attend, no fires to put out. She found herself wandering through her own house like a stranger, noticing details she'd never paid attention to. The family photos on the mantle, most of them from years ago when Emma was younger. The dust on the bookshelves, evidence of Mrs. Rodriguez's practical priorities. The silence that filled the rooms, a silence that would be broken in a few hours when Emma came home. Victoria ended up in Emma's room, something she rarely entered. It was neat and organized, reflecting either Emma's personality or Mrs. Rodriguez's influence. The bed was made with military precision. The desk was clear except for a stack of library books and several notebooks. Victoria picked up one of the notebooks and opened it, finding page after page of mathematical notations, problems worked out in Emma's careful handwriting. Some pages had mistakes, crossed out and corrected. Others had notes in the margins, Emma's thoughts about different approaches to problem. It was like reading her daughter's diary, but instead of thoughts about friends or dreams or fears, it was all mathematics. The equations were Emma's way of processing the world, her means of expression. Victoria thought of her own journals from childhood, filled with drawings and stories and complaints about her strict parents. She'd been a normal child with normal preoccupations. Emma was something else entirely, and Victoria was only beginning to understand the implications of that difference. She was still sitting on Emma's bed, the notebook open in her lap, when she heard the front door open at 3:15. She heard Emma's voice thanking Mrs. Rodriguez for the snack, heard her footsteps on the stairs. Then Emma appeared in the doorway of her room, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her expression transforming from tired resignation to shocked delight when she saw her mother. "Mommy, you're home?" "I'm home," Victoria said, patting the bed beside her. "Come tell me about your day." Emma dropped her backpack and climbed onto the bed, curling into her mother's side with an ease that suggested she'd been starving for this kind of contact. "School was boring," she said. "We had a spelling test and I got all the words right in like 2 minutes, so Mrs. Patterson gave me a book to read. It was about a kid who travels through time, but the science was all wrong. Time dilation doesn't work like that." Victoria smiled despite herself. Only Emma would critique the scientific accuracy of a children's book. "Did you tell Mrs. Patterson that?" "No," Emma said, her voice small. "I didn't want her to think I was showing off." The learned helplessness in that statement broke Victoria's heart. "Emma, I need to tell you something important. You're going to have some special tests on Friday. There will be people who want to ask you questions and watch you solve problems. But it's not like school tests. There are no wrong answers. They just want to understand how you think." Emma looked up at her mother, uncertainty in her eyes. "Am I in trouble?" "No, baby. You're extraordinary, and we're going to make sure you get the help and support you need to be as extraordinary as you can be." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing. "Will the other kids think I'm even weirder?" "Maybe," Victoria admitted, deciding that honesty was better than false comfort. "But you know what? The right people will think you're amazing, and those are the only people whose opinions matter." They sat together in the afternoon light, mother and daughter, both of them standing at the threshold of a new and uncertain future. Friday morning arrived with the weight of an execution. Victoria had barely slept, lying awake imagining all the ways the testing could go wrong. What if the specialists decided Emma was just good at memorization? What if they found something wrong with her? What if the pressure of being evaluated caused Emma to shut down? By the time dawn broke through her bedroom windows, Victoria had mentally catastrophized through a dozen different scenarios, each one worse than the last. Emma, by contrast, seemed almost excited. She dressed herself in her favorite outfit, a purple dress with stars on it that she insisted made her look like a mathematician. Victoria didn't have the heart to tell her that mathematicians didn't have a particular look. If Emma wanted to believe that stars in purple conveyed mathematical genius, who was Victoria to argue? The Gifted Children's Institute was located in a renovated brownstone in the Upper West Side, far from the sterile medical buildings Victoria had imagined. The exterior was warm brick with window boxes full of flowers, and the interior was decorated more like a comfortable home than a clinical facility. Soft rugs covered hardwood floors. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with everything from picture books to advanced physics texts. There was even a corner with puzzles and games, though Victoria suspected they were more sophisticated than they appeared. Dr. Morrison met them in the reception area, her smile genuine and welcoming. "Emma, it's so wonderful to meet you. I've heard you're quite the mathematician." Emma nodded shyly, pressing closer to Victoria's side. Her earlier confidence seemed to have evaporated now that they were actually here. Victoria felt her daughter's small hand grip hers tighter and resisted the urge to scoop Emma up and carry her back to the car. This was necessary. This was important, even if it felt like she was feeding her child to wolves. "Why don't we start with a tour?" Dr. Morrison suggested, clearly sensing Emma's nervousness. "I want to show you all the interesting rooms we have here. We've got some puzzles I bet you'll love." As they walked through the building, Victoria watched Emma slowly relax. Dr. Morrison had a gift for talking to children, neither condescending nor overly adult. She showed Emma a room filled with mathematical manipulatives, geometric shapes and pattern blocks and objects that Victoria couldn't begin to name. She showed her a quiet room with comfortable chairs and soft lighting, explaining that sometimes people needed a break from thinking hard. And she showed her the testing room, which looked more like a cozy study than an examination space. "This is where you'll spend some time with Dr. Reeves and Dr. Chun," Dr. Morrison explained. "They're both really smart people who love mathematics just like you do. They're going to ask you to solve some problems and talk about how you think. Does that sound okay?" Emma looked around the room, taking in the whiteboard on one wall, the comfortable chairs, the table with paper and pencils laid out neatly. "Will my mom be here, Doctor?" Morrison glanced at Victoria. "For part of it, yes. But sometimes we'll need you to work with just the doctors so we can see how you problem solve on your own. Your mom will be right down the hall the whole time, though." Victoria saw the moment of panic flash across Emma's face and knelt down to her daughter's level. "Hey, remember what I said? These people want to understand how amazing you are. They're not here to judge you or make you feel bad. They're here to help us figure out how to make school better for you." Emma nodded, but Victoria could see the anxiety in her eyes. It was the same look Emma got before a big test at school, that fear of being evaluated and found wanting. Victoria wanted to tell her that there was no way Emma could fail this, that the whole point was to understand her abilities, not to measure her against some arbitrary standard. But 8-year-olds didn't always respond to logic, especially when they were scared. The first session began with Dr. Reeves, a kind-faced woman in her 40s with graying hair and an easy manner. She started with simple questions, asking Emma about her interests and her favorite subject. Emma's answers were careful and measured at first, but gradually she began to relax. When Dr. Reeves asked about mathematics, Emma's whole demeanor changed. Her face lit up and her words came faster, explaining how she'd discovered calculus videos online and how the concepts just made sense to her. Victoria watched from a chair in the corner, trying to be invisible while her daughter underwent scrutiny. Dr. Reeves pulled out a worksheet with problems on it, starting simple and gradually increasing in difficulty. Victoria saw Emma work through basic arithmetic, then algebra, then calculus, each level completed with increasing confidence. When Dr. Reeves pulled out a problem involving partial derivatives, Victoria held her breath. This was the moment of truth. Emma stared at the problem for a long moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then she picked up a pencil and began to work. Victoria couldn't follow the mathematics, but she could see the certainty in Emma's, the way her daughter's hand moved across the paper with purpose and precision. When Emma set down the pencil and pushed the paper toward Dr. Reeves, she looked both proud and nervous. "Can you explain your reasoning, Doctor?" Reeves asked, her voice carefully neutral. Emma walked through her solution, pointing to different parts of the equation and explaining her logic. Victoria watched Dr. Reeves's expression shift from professional interest to genuine amazement. The doctor made notes on her tablet, nodding occasionally, asking clarifying questions. The exchange went on for nearly 20 minutes, Emma growing more animated as she explained not just what she'd done, but why, the underlying principles that made the solution work. When the session ended, Dr. Reeves walked Victoria out into the hallway while Emma was given a snack and a break. The doctor's expression was grave and Victoria felt her stomach drop. Was something wrong? Had Emma not performed as expected? "Mrs. Chun," Dr. Reeves said quietly, "I need you to understand something. I've been testing gifted children for 15 years. I've worked with some of the brightest young minds in the country. What I just witnessed in there, she shook her head, her expression a mix of awe and concern. Your daughter isn't just gifted, she's profoundly, extraordinarily gifted. The level of mathematical intuition she's displaying is something I've only seen in perhaps 3 or 4 children in my entire career. Victoria felt the words land like physical blows. She'd known Emma was special, but hearing it confirmed by an expert made it real in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. What does that mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What does that mean for her life? It means she needs very specialized support, Dr. Reeves said. It means her educational needs are going to be complex and challenging to meet. It means she's going to face difficulties that most people can't even imagine. But it also means she has the potential to contribute something truly extraordinary to the field of mathematics if she's supported properly. The testing continued over the next 3 days. Emma worked with Dr. Chun, a mathematics professor who specialized in childhood mathematical giftedness. She underwent IQ testing, which Victoria learned was far more complex than she realized, measuring everything from spatial reasoning to processing speed to working memory. She was observed while solving puzzles, evaluated on her social and emotional development, interviewed about her feelings and experiences at school. Victoria attended as much as she was allowed, watching her daughter navigate this strange new world with a mixture of anxiety and curiosity. She saw Emma struggle with some of the social and emotional questions, her discomfort evident when asked about friendships and feeling. But she saw Emma absolutely shine during the mathematical assessments, her face glowing with pure intellectual joy when presented with challenging problems. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Victoria sat alone in Dr. Morrison's office while Emma was in a final session. The walls were covered with diplomas and certificates, but also with children's drawings and thank you notes from families. It was a reminder that behind all the clinical language and formal assessments, this was ultimately about helping children. Dr. Morrison entered with a thick folder under her arm and a serious expression. She sat down across from Victoria and placed the folder on the desk between them. Mrs. Chun, I want to thank you for your patience during this process. I know it's been intense. Just tell me, Victoria said, unable to bear the suspense any longer. Tell me what you found, Doctor. Morrison opened the folder and pulled out several pages of densely printed text and graphs. Emma's full-scale IQ score places her in the 99.99th percentile. Her mathematical reasoning abilities are literally off the charts, higher than our tests can accurately measure. But what's even more remarkable is the pattern of her abilities. She doesn't just solve problems quickly or accurately. She demonstrates genuine mathematical creativity, the ability to see patterns and connections that even trained mathematicians might miss. Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. So it's real. This isn't just me being a proud mother or Richard being impressed by a clever kid. This is real. Very real, Doctor, Morrison confirmed. But Mrs. Chun, I need to be frank with you about what this means. Emma is going to need accommodations that go far beyond what a traditional school can provide. She needs access to university-level mathematics instruction, probably starting immediately. She needs intellectual peers, which may mean interacting with much older students. She needs psychological support to help her navigate the social isolation that comes with being this different from her age mates. The weight of it settled on Victoria's shoulders, heavy and inescapable. How do I do all of that? She asked, hearing the desperation in her own voice. How do I give her what she needs while also making sure she has a normal childhood? Doctor, Morrison's expression softened with sympathy. That's the question every parent of a profoundly gifted child struggles with, and I won't lie to you. There's no perfect answer. It's a constant balancing act between pushing and protecting, between accommodating her intellectual needs and preserving her emotional well-being. But you're not alone in this. We have resources, connections to other families, recommendations for educators and therapists who specialize in this population. What if I fail her? Victoria whispered, voicing the fear that had been growing in her chest since that first night when she'd discovered Emma's secret. What if I make the wrong choices and I damage her? You won't, Doctor, Morrison said with quiet certainty. Do you know how I know? Because you're here, because you're asking these questions, because you're willing to rearrange your life to meet your daughter's needs. Most parents of gifted children don't realize there's a problem until it's too late, until their child has learned to hide their abilities so thoroughly that they can't access them anymore. You caught this early enough to make a difference. They spent the next hour going over specific recommendations. Doctor, Morrison suggested connecting Emma with a mathematics professor who could provide mentorship. Probably someone from Columbia or NYU. She recommended a specialized school in Manhattan that served profoundly gifted children, though she warned that the waiting list was long. She provided names of therapists who understood the unique challenges of childhood giftedness, and she gave Victoria a thick packet of resources, books, and articles and websites for parents navigating this complicated world. When Emma emerged from her final session, she looked exhausted but relieved. Dr. Chun, the mathematics professor who'd been working with her, had a huge smile on his face. That child is remarkable, he told Victoria. Absolutely remarkable. I'd be honored to work with her if you'd like a tutor. Victoria felt something loosen in her chest. A way forward. Not an easy path, but but at least a path. She took Emma's hand and they walked out of the institute together, stepping into the late afternoon sunlight. Emma looked up at her mother, uncertainty in her eyes. "So, am I weird?" she asked quietly. "Are all those tests going to make kids think I'm even weirder?" Victoria knelt down on the sidewalk, not caring about the people walking past them or the expensive skirt she was wrinkling. She took both of Emma's hands in hers. "You're not weird, baby. You're extraordinary. And yes, that means you're different, but different is not bad. Different is just different. And you know what? We're gonna find you other kids who are different in the same way you are. Kids who love mathematics as much as you do." The Monday after testing brought a crisis that Victoria hadn't anticipated. She'd arranged for Emma to begin working with Dr. Chun from Columbia twice a week, had submitted applications to 3 specialized schools for gifted children, and had even started attending a support group for parents of exceptional kids. Everything was moving in the right direction, except Emma refused to go to school. Victoria stood in Emma's bedroom doorway, watching her daughter huddle under the covers, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. Emma had woken up with a stomachache, the kind that Victoria recognized had nothing to do with physical illness and everything to do with anxiety. This was the 3rd Monday in a row that Emma had tried to avoid school, and Victoria's patience was wearing thin, even as her heart broke for her daughter. "Sweetheart, you have to go to school," Victoria said, keeping her voice gentle but firm. "I know it's hard right now, but you can't just stay home." Emma's voice was muffled by the blankets. "Everyone knows now, Mommy. Mrs. Patterson told them I'm doing special math with a college professor. Kids are calling me names. They say I'm a freak and a show-off and that I think I'm better than everyone else." Victoria felt anger surge through her, hot and protective. She'd specifically asked Mrs. Patterson to be discreet about Emma's special accommodations. Instead, the teacher had apparently made an announcement to the entire class, probably thinking she was being helpful or supportive. The road to hell, Victoria thought bitterly, was paved with good intentions from well-meaning educators who didn't understand the social dynamics of giftedness. She sat down on the edge of Emma's bed, pulling the covers back gently so she could see her daughter's face. "What did you tell them when they called you names?" "I didn't say anything," Emma whispered. "What could I say? They're right. I am different. I do think about things they don't care about. I can't even talk to them anymore because we have nothing in common." The isolation in Emma's voice was devastating. Victoria thought about her own childhood, about the groups of friends she'd had, the sleepovers and birthday parties and endless phone conversations about nothing important. Emma was being denied all of that, not because she was unfriendly or unkind, but because her mind worked at a frequency her peers couldn't hear. "Listen to me," Victoria said, brushing Emma's hair back from her forehead. "Those kids are 8 years old. They don't understand that being smart isn't the same as thinking you're better than everyone else, but you know what? Their opinions don't define you, you define." "But I want to be like them," Emma said, and the desperation in her voice cut Victoria to the core. "I want to care about the same things and laugh at the same jokes and not feel like I'm living in a different world even though I'm sitting in the same classroom." Victoria had no good answer for that. She couldn't make Emma's classmates more understanding. She couldn't dumb her daughter down to fit in. She couldn't wave a magic wand and make the pain of being different disappear. All she could do was be present, be supportive, and keep moving forward with the plan to get Emma into an environment where she wouldn't be the only one who was different. "How about this?" Victoria said after a moment. "You go to school today. If it's really unbearable, if something happens that makes you feel unsafe or too upset, you call me and I'll come get you immediate. No questions asked, but I need you to try." Emma considered this, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "You promise you'll come if I call?" "I promise." Victoria pulled her daughter into a hug, feeling the small body shake with residual sobs. "And Emma, I need you to know something. Being smart is not something to apologize for. Being different is not something to be ashamed of. Anyone who makes you feel bad for being who you are doesn't deserve your friendship." Emma nodded against Victoria's shoulder, but Victoria could tell her daughter didn't really believe it. How could she? At 8 years old, fitting in felt like life or death. Being accepted by your peers mattered more than abstract concepts like self-worth and authenticity. Victoria knew that the words she was saying were true, but she also knew they wouldn't make Emma hurt any less. She drove Emma to school herself that morning instead of sending her in the car service. As they pulled up to the Westbrook Academy's pristine entrance, Victoria saw Emma's shoulders hunch, her body language screaming reluctance and dread. Other children were streaming through the doors, laughing and chattering, existing in their uncomplicated 8-year-old world. Emma was about to walk into that world as an alien, as someone who'd been marked as other. "Remember," Victoria said as Emma slowly gathered her backpack, "call me if you need me." "I mean it." Emma nodded and climbed out of the car, her movements heavy with resignation. Victoria watched her daughter walk toward the school entrance, each step seeming to take enormous effort. She wanted to leap out of the car, scoop Emma up, and take her somewhere safe. But where was safe for a child like Emma? Nowhere in the world was designed for 8-year-olds who could do doctoral-level mathematics. Emma would have to learn to navigate this difficult terrain, and all Victoria could do was be there to catch her when she fell. Victoria drove to her office, but her mind stayed at Westbrook Academy, imagining Emma sitting in class trying to make herself smaller, trying to be less than she was so the other children wouldn't notice her. She'd barely been at her desk for an hour when her phone rang. Emma's school flashed on the caller ID and Victoria's heart dropped. "Miss Chun." This is Principal Howard. I'm afraid there's been an incident with Emma. She's fine physically, but I think you should come to the school. Victoria was already grabbing her coat. What happened? There was a confrontation with some other students. Emma became quite upset. It might be better if we discuss this in person. The drive back to Westbrook felt like it took hours, even though it was only 15 minutes. Victoria's mind spun through terrible scenarios. Had Emma been bullied? Had she lashed out physically? Had something escalated to the point where her daughter was in real danger? When she finally arrived at the school and was directed to Principal Howard's office, she found Emma sitting in a chair. Her face blotchy from crying, her hands clenched in her lap. Victoria went to her immediately, kneeling beside the chair. "Baby, what happened? Are you okay?" Emma looked at her mother with eyes that held not just sadness but a kind of bone-deep weariness that no 8-year-old should have to feel. "They took my notebook," she whispered, "the one with all my math in it. They were passing it around at recess, making fun of it, saying it was just scribbles and that I was pretending to be smart. And when I tried to get it back, they threw it in the mud." Victoria felt fury rise in her chest, white-hot and fierce. She looked at Principal Howard, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. "And where are these children now?" "They're in their classroom, receiving consequences," Principal Howard said. "This kind of bullying is absolutely not tolerated at Westbrook Academy. I can assure you that the students involved will face appropriate disciplinary action." Disciplinary action. Victoria wanted to laugh at the inadequacy of it. Detention or lost recess time wouldn't undo the damage that had been done. Emma's notebook, her mathematical journal that she'd kept for months, documenting her journey through calculus and differential equations, was lying in the mud. The casual cruelty of children had targeted the thing Emma valued most, and no amount of consequences would take away the sting of that violation. "I want to see the notebook," Victoria said. Principal Howard pulled a mud-stained composition book from his desk drawer. Victoria took it, feeling the damp pages, seeing the smeared equations and torn paper. Some pages were completely illegible. Emma's careful work destroyed. She looked at her daughter, saw the devastation in Emma's eyes, and made a decision. "Emma's not coming back to Westbrook," Victoria said flatly. "Effective immediately, I'm withdrawing her from this school." Principal Howard looked startled. "Mrs. Chun? I understand you're upset, but let's not be hasty. We're working on Emma's individualized education plan. We've made arrangements for her to have advanced materials. We're trying to accommodate her needs." "You're not accommodating anything," Victoria said, her voice cold with controlled anger. "You've created an environment where my daughter is isolated and targeted, where being gifted is treated as a character flaw rather than a gift to be nurtured, where her peers feel emboldened to destroy her work and mock her passion. I'm not paying $40,000 a year for that experience." She stood up, taking Emma's hand. "We'll be by tomorrow to collect her belongings from her locker. Please have the withdrawal paperwork ready." Principal Howard tried to argue, citing policies and procedures and the difficulty of finding another placement mid-year. Victoria ignored him, leading Emma out of the office and through the pristine hallways of Westbrook Academy for what she hoped would be the last time. Other students stared at them as they passed, and Victoria could feel their curiosity and judgment. Let them stare. They weren't Emma's peers. They never had been. In the car, Emma was silent, staring at the ruined notebook in her lap. Victoria drove not home, but to a small park near their house, needing to have this conversation somewhere neutral, somewhere peaceful. They sat on a bench overlooking a small pond, watching ducks paddle across the still water. "I'm sorry, Mommy," Emma said quietly. "I know I caused problems. I know you were trying to make things work at Westbrook." Victoria turned to face her daughter, taking both of Emma's hands. "You listened to me. You did not cause problems. You were brave enough to be yourself in an environment that couldn't handle you. That's not your failure. That's their failure. But now you have to find me a new school, and that's going to be hard and expensive, and it's all because I'm different." The raw self-blame in Emma's voice broke Victoria's heart. Her daughter had internalized the message that being gifted was a burden, a problem to be solved, rather than a gift to be celebrated. How did you undo that kind of damage? How did you teach a child that her brilliance was beautiful when the world kept telling her it was difficult? Emma, being different is not easy. I won't lie to you about that, but it's also not wrong. You have a gift that most people will never have, a mind that can see patterns and solve problems in ways that could genuinely change the world someday. That's extraordinary. And yes, it means your life is going to be more complicated than other kids' lives, but that doesn't mean it's going to be bad. It just means it's going to be different. "Will I ever have real friends?" Emma asked, her voice so small and lost that Victoria wanted to weep. "Will I ever find people who understand me?" "Yes," Victoria said with absolute certainty, even though she had no guarantee that it was true. "Yes, you will. There are other kids out there like you, Emma. Kids who think about mathematics the way you do. Kids who get excited about theorems and equations. Kids who will understand exactly what it feels like to be the only one in the room who sees the world differently. We're going to find them. How? I don't know yet," Victoria admitted, "but I promise you I will figure it out. Even if I have to call every specialized school. Even if I have to homeschool you and organize a network of gifted kids myself. Even if I have to append our entire life, I will find you a place where you belong." They sat in silence for a while, watching the ducks and listening to the quiet sounds of the park around them. Victoria thought about the life she'd built, the careful structures of success and achievement she'd constructed. None of it mattered compared to this, to her daughter's happiness and well-being. She would tear it all down if she had to, if that's what Emma needed. "Can we go home now?" Emma asked finally. "I'm tired." "Of course, sweetheart." Victoria stood up, keeping hold of Emma's hand. When they got home, Emma went straight to her room. Victoria heard the door close softly, the sound of retreat and defeat. She stood in the hallway, staring at that closed door, feeling helpless and furious in equal measure. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of phone calls and applications and increasingly desperate Google searches. Victoria had never felt so powerless in her life. She could negotiate million-dollar deals and navigate complex business acts, but she couldn't find a single school with immediate openings that could accommodate Emma's needs. The specialized academy Dr. Morrison had recommended had a 3-year waiting list. 2 other schools for gifted children had no spaces available until the following academic year. A private school that claimed to serve highly gifted students turned out to be more interested in collecting tuition from wealthy parents than actually challenging exceptional minds. Emma stayed home, officially on a leave of absence from Westbrook while Victoria figured out their next steps. Dr. Chun came twice a week for tutoring sessions, and those 2 hours were the only times Victoria saw her daughter truly come alive. The rest of the time, Emma drifted through the house like a ghost, listless and withdrawn. She'd stopped drawing equations in her notebook. She'd stopped watching mathematics lectures online. It was as if the incident at Westbrook had extinguished some essential spark in her, and Victoria didn't know how to reignite it. On a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after withdrawing Emma from school, Victoria sat in her office at Chun Technologies, staring at her computer screen without seeing it. She'd been at work late, a habit she'd fallen back into as a way to avoid the helplessness she felt at home. The office building was mostly empty at this hour, just the night cleaning crew making their rounds and a few workaholics like herself burning the midnight oil. She heard a knock on her open door and looked up to see Marcus, her assistant, standing in the doorway with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mrs. Chun, but there's a situation in the break room on this floor. The coffee machine malfunctioned and there's water everywhere. Maintenance is handling it, but I thought you should know in case you need to go that way." Victoria nodded absently, turning back to her computer. She was trying to compose an email to Dr. Morrison asking if there were any other options they hadn't explored when she heard voices in the hallway. A child's voice, bright and curious, cutting through the corporate silence like a bell. "But why does the equation work that way?" the voice asked. "What makes negative numbers multiply to become positive?" Victoria froze. That was Emma's voice. What was Emma doing here? And she was supposed to be at home with Mrs. Rodriguez. Victoria stood up and walked to her doorway, following the sound of her daughter's voice down the hall toward the break room. The scene she discovered was unexpected. Emma sat on the floor outside the break room, papers spread around her, talking animatedly to a man in a janitor's uniform who was mopping up water from the malfunctioning coffee machine. The man was listening to Emma with genuine interest, his expression thoughtful as he considered her question. "Well," the man said, his voice gentle and patient, "think of it like this. A negative number is like a debt, right? If you owe someone money, that's negative. Now, if you multiply one debt by another debt, you're essentially reversing the reversal. 2 wrongs don't make a right in life, but in mathematics, 2 negatives do make a positive." Emma's face lit up with understanding. "Oh, so it's like the direction changes twice. Like if you're walking backward and then you reverse time, you'd actually be walking forward." "Exactly," the man said, smiling. "You've got it. That's a perfect way to think about it." Victoria stood frozen in the hallway, watching this interaction. Who was this janitor who could explain abstract mathematical concepts with such clarity? She'd seen Emma's face during those explanations, seen the genuine intellectual engagement there. It was the same expression Emma wore during her sessions with Dr. Chun, that look of pure joy that came from being truly understood. "Emma," Victoria called out, stepping forward. "What are you doing here?" Emma looked up guiltily. "Mrs. Rodriguez had to leave early for a family emergency. You weren't answering your phone, so I took a car service here. I knew you were working late." "I'm sorry, Mommy." Victoria felt a pang of guilt. She'd been so absorbed in her work that she'd silenced her phone. Emma had been left with no choice but to come find her. "We'll talk about this later," Victoria said, then turned her attention to the janitor. "Thank you for keeping her company, Mr. Porter," the man said, standing up. James Porter. He was tall and lean, probably in his early 50s, with kind eyes and calloused hands. "Just Jim is fine. Your daughter has some very interesting questions about mathematics. You were talking to her about negative numbers?" Victoria asked, studying him more closely. There was something in his manner, an ease with abstract concepts that seemed incongruous with his uniform and mop bucket. She asked, so I answered, Jim said simply. He began gathering his cleaning supplies. "I should get back to work." "You have a bright daughter, Mrs. Chun, very bright indeed." "Wait," Victoria said, making a decision on pure instinct. "Do you have a background in mathematics? Teaching, maybe?" Jim's expression shuddered slightly, becoming more guarded. "I did once, a long time ago. Now I clean floors. It's simpler this way." There was a story there, Victoria could sense it. Pain and retreat and deliberate choice to step away from something. She recognized it because she'd seen hints of it in herself, that urge to run from difficult things, to choose the path that required less of your heart. But something about this man, about the way he'd explained mathematics to Emma with such natural skill, made Victoria curious. "Emma, go pack up your papers. We're leaving in a few minutes," Victoria instructed. Once Emma was out of earshot, Victoria turned back to Jim. "Miss Porter, I have a proposition for you. My daughter is profoundly gifted in mathematics. She's been working with a professor from Columbia, but what she really needs is someone who can help her love mathematics again. Someone who can make it feel like play instead of pressure. Would you be interested in tutoring her? Jim's expression cycled through surprise, discomfort, and finally firm refusal. I'm sorry, Mrs. Chun, but no, I don't do that anymore. The finality in his voice was absolute. Victoria recognized the tone of someone who'd built walls and had no intention of tearing them down. But she'd also seen the way he'd talked to Emma, the natural patience and skill he'd displayed in those few minutes of conversation. She wasn't ready to give up. Can I ask why not? Victoria pressed. You clearly have the ability. Emma responded to you in a way I haven't seen her respond to anyone except Dr. Chun. Jim picked up his mop bucket, his body language screaming retreat. Because I left that life for a reason, Mrs. Chun. I'm sorry about your daughter's situation. I hope you find what she needs, but I'm not the person to provide it. He walked away down the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Victoria stood watching him go, frustrated and intrigued in equal measure. There was definitely a story there. A mathematician or teacher who'd given it all up to mop floors in a corporate building. That was a tale of loss and deliberate withdrawal, and Victoria found herself wanting to know more. Emma reappeared with her papers tucked under her arm. I like him, she announced. He explains things in a way that makes sense. Not like he's trying to test me or prove something, just like he actually wants me to understand. Victoria looked at her daughter, seeing the animation in Emma's face. The spark that had been missing for weeks. In 10 minutes of conversation, this janitor had accomplished what Victoria hadn't been able to do in 2 weeks of desperate efforts. He'd made Emma excited about mathematics again. The drive home was quieter than usual. Emma sat in the back seat, looking out the window at the passing city lights. Victoria's mind churned with possibilities. She could find out more about James Porter. She could figure out what had driven him away from teaching. She could offer him enough money to make it worth his while to come back. But something told her that money wasn't what had driven Jim Porter away from education, and money wasn't going to bring him back. When they got home, Victoria tucked Emma into bed, listening to her daughter chatter about the conversation with Mr. Porter, how he'd made negative numbers make sense in a way that felt intuitive rather than arbitrary. Emma's enthusiasm was infectious and heartbreaking, because Victoria knew that this accidental encounter in a hallway couldn't be the solution to their problems. After Emma fell asleep, Victoria sat in her home office, pulling up the employee database for Chun Technologies. She found James Porter's file easily enough. It was surprisingly sparse. He'd been working as a night janitor for 3 years. Always received excellent performance reviews, never missed a shift. Before that, his employment history showed a 2-year gap. And before that gap, there was a single line that made Victoria's breath catch. Previous employment: Associate Professor of Mathematics Education, Phillips Academy. Phillips Academy was one of the most prestigious prep schools in the country. An associate professor there would have been educating some of the brightest young minds in America. What had happened to make someone go from that position to mopping floors in a corporate building? What kind of loss or trauma could drive someone to such a complete reinvention? Victoria sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. She thought about her own losses, the way grief and guilt could make you want to run from everything that reminded you of pain. She thought about Emma, desperately needing someone who could understand her mathematical mind and also understand what it felt like to be isolated and different. And she thought about James Porter, hiding in plain sight, using his brilliance to clean floors instead of shape mine. There was a story here, a tragedy probably, but also perhaps an opportunity for redemption, not just for Emma, but for Jim Porter himself. Victoria didn't know what had broken him, but she'd seen the way he'd come alive when explaining mathematics to Emma. That spark hadn't been extinguished, just buried under layers of self-protection and deliberate retreat. She made a decision. She would find out what had happened to James Porter, and then she would convince him that hiding his gift was a waste, not just for Emma's sake, but for his own. It wouldn't be easy. He'd built his walls high and strong, but Victoria Chun hadn't built a tech empire by accepting no for an answer. She was patient, she was persistent, and she was motivated by the most powerful force in the world, a mother's love for her child. The next morning, Victoria arrived at her office earlier than usual, hoping to catch Jim Porter at the end of his night shift. She found him in the maintenance closet, putting away his cleaning supplies. He looked up when she entered, his expression wary. "Mrs. Chun," he said carefully, "is there something I can help you with?" "I looked into your background," Victoria said, deciding honesty was the best approach. "Phillips Academy, associate professor. That's not a position someone gives up lightly." Jim's expression hardened. "That's private information, Mrs. Chun, and it's in the past." "I know," Victoria acknowledged, "and I'm not here to pry into your personal life, but I am here to make one more appeal. Emma hasn't stopped talking about your explanation of negative numbers." Jim closed the closet door with deliberate care, his back to Victoria. "I'm glad I could help in the moment, Mrs. Chun, but that doesn't change my answer. I don't tutor. I don't teach. I clean floors, and that's all I do." "Why?" Victoria asked bluntly. "Why would someone with your background choose to hide that gift?" Jim turned around and Victoria saw something flash in his eyes. Not anger, but pain, deep and old and carefully managed. "Because gifts can be weapons, Mrs. Chun. Because believing you can fix things believing you have some special ability to help people. That kind of arrogance has consequences. And when those consequences involve a child getting hurt, you learn that maybe you're better off just mopping floors. The words hung heavy in the small maintenance closet. Victoria felt the weight of Jim's confession, the self-blame embedded in every syllable. What happened? She asked soft. Jim laughed, but there was no humor in it. I had a student, brilliant kid, maybe even more gifted than your daughter, 12 years old and already working through college-level mathematics. I pushed him, encouraged him, told him he could do anything, be anything. I was so proud of what we were accomplishing together. She paused, seeing Jim's hands clench at his sides. And then he tried to kill himself, Jim said flatly. Couldn't handle the pressure, the expectations, the constant feeling of having to perform. His parents found him in time, thank God. But it was my fault, I pushed too hard. I saw only his potential and not his fragility. I treated him like a mathematical genius instead of a scared kid who just wanted someone to like him for who he was, not what he could do. Victoria felt the story settle over her like a cold blanket. She understood now. Jim Porter had made the mistake of caring too much, of believing in a child's abilities without protecting that child's heart. And when it had gone wrong, he'd blamed himself so thoroughly that he'd dismantled his entire life. That wasn't your fault, Victoria said quietly. You couldn't have known. Jim's smile was bitter. That's what everyone said. The school, the therapists, even the parents eventually. But I knew better. I was the one who saw him every day. I was the one who should have noticed when the light in his eyes started to dim. I was so focused on his mathematical development that I missed every warning sign that he was drowning. So yes, Mrs. Chun, my fault. And I promised myself I would never put another child at risk like that again. The conviction in his voice was absolute. This was a man who'd tried himself, found himself guilty, and sentenced himself to a lifetime of self-imposed exile. Victoria recognized that kind of guilt because she'd felt echoes of it herself. All those years of missing Emma's childhood, of being too busy to notice her daughter's brilliance in isolation. Guilt was a powerful motivator, but it was also a prison. I understand why you're afraid, Victoria said. But Mr. Porter, Jim, running away from your gift doesn't undo what happened to that student. It just means that every other child who could benefit from your knowledge and patience won't get that chance, including my daughter. That's not fair, Jim said, his voice rough with emotion. You're trying to manipulate me. Yes, Victoria agreed. I am, because I'm desperate and my daughter is drowning the same way your student probably was. She's isolated, she's miserable, and she's starting to see her brilliance as a curse instead of a gift. I've tried everything. I've hired the best tutors, consulted with specialists, applied to every school I can find, but none of them understand her the way you did in 10 minutes of conversation. Jim shook his head. You don't know what you're asking. I'm asking you to help one child, Victoria said. Not to resurrect your entire career. Not to take on the weight of fixing every gifted kid in the world. Just Emma. Just a few hours a week. And if at any point you feel like it's too much, if you see any signs that she's struggling emotionally, we stop. No questions, no blame. Jim was silent for a long moment, his internal struggle visible on his face. Victoria could see him weighing his fear against something else, maybe curiosity, maybe that spark she'd seen when he was explaining mathematics to Emma. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I'd need to meet with her formally, see if we actually work together. And I'd need your promise that her emotional well-being comes before her mathematical development. Always. You have it, Victoria said immediately. Her happiness matters more than any equation she could ever solve. Jim nodded slowly, looking like a man stepping toward the edge of a cliff. 1 month trial, twice a week for an hour. If I see any signs that this is harming her, I'm out immediately. Victoria felt relief flood through her. Agreed. And Jim, thank you. You have no idea what this means. I hope I don't regret this, Jim said, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes that looked almost like hope. The first tutoring session was scheduled for Saturday morning at Victoria's house. Emma had been cautiously excited when Victoria told her about the arrangement, but Victoria could see the wariness there too. Emma had been hurt by the kids at Westbrook. She was learning to protect herself by not getting too invested, not hoping too hard. Jim arrived exactly on time, carrying a worn leather satchel that looked like it had seen better days. He'd changed out of his janitor uniform into casual clothes, jeans and a simple button-down shirt, and somehow looked more himself this way. Victoria led him to the dining room where Emma sat waiting, a notebook and pencil in front of her, her expression guarded. Hi, Emma, Jim said, sitting down across from her. Your mom tells me you've been working on some pretty advanced stuff. Want to show me what you're interested in? Emma pushed the notebook toward him without speaking. Jim opened it and spent several minutes just looking through the pages, his expression neutral. Victoria stood in the doorway, watching anxiously, ready to intervene if this went wrong. Finally, Jim looked up at Emma. This is really good work. I can see you've been teaching yourself calculus, but I notice you're struggling a bit with integration by parts. That's a tricky concept. Want to work on it together? Emma nodded slowly. The other kids at school said my math was just scribbles, that I was pretending to be smart. Jim's expression soft. The other kids at school probably don't know what calculus looks like. That doesn't mean your work is invaluable. It just means you're working at a level they haven't reached yet, and that's okay. Different people are good at different things. But being good at math makes me weird, Emma said. And Victoria's heart clenched at the resignation in her daughter's voice. Jim considered this for a moment. You know what I think? Being good at math makes you mathematical. Being interested in problems that other people find boring makes you curious. Being different makes you different. Weird is just a word people use when they don't understand something. And usually when people don't understand something, that says more about them than about the thing they don't understand. Emma looked at him with something like wonder. Did people think you were weird when you were a kid? Absolutely, Jim said with a small smile. I spent recess doing logic puzzles while the other kids played kickball. I read mathematics textbooks for fun. I was definitely the weird kid, but you know what? I wouldn't trade those hours I spent with numbers for anything. They brought me joy, and that's what matters. Do you still do math for fun? Emma asked. Not as much as I used to, Jim admitted. I got scared of it for a while, but maybe working with you will help me remember why I loved it in the first place. Victoria saw Emma's shoulders relax slightly, the defensive posture easing. This was exactly what Emma needed. Not someone who treated her like a circus act or a problem to be solved, but someone who understood that being gifted was complicated and sometimes lonely, and that it was okay to struggle with that reality. She quietly left the room, letting them work together. For the next hour, she sat in her home office, ostensibly dealing with work emails, but actually straining to hear the conversation from the dining. She heard Emma's voice, tentative at first, but growing more confident as the session progressed. She heard Jim's patient explanations, willingness to let Emma work through problems at her own pace, his gentle corrections when she made mistakes. When the hour was up, Victoria walked back to the dining room. Emma's face was flushed with intellectual excitement, her notebook filled with new equations and notes. Jim was packing up his satchel, his expression carefully neutral, but Victoria could see something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. A spark of the teacher he used to be, emerging from years of hibernation. So Victoria asked Emma after Jim had left, "What did you think?" "He's different from Dr. Chun," Emma said thoughtfully. "Dr. Chun is really smart and knows everything, but Mr. Porter makes it feel like we're discovering things together. Like he's curious too, not just teaching me. That's a good thing, right?" Emma nodded, then looked up at her mother with serious eyes. "Mommy, why did he stop teaching? Something bad happened, didn't it?" Victoria was surprised by her daughter's perceptiveness. "What makes you think that?" "Because he looks sad," Emma said simply, "like he's carrying something heavy. And when I asked him if he missed teaching, he got this look on his face like he was remembering something that hurt." Victoria sat down beside her daughter, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes people go through difficult experiences that make them doubt themselves. Porter had something happen in his past that made him think he couldn't help students anymore. But I think working with you might help him remember that he can." Emma absorbed this information with the gravity of a much older child. "I'll try to be good," she said. "I don't want to be the reason he gets sad again." Victoria pulled Emma into a hug. "Sweetheart, just be yourself. That's all anyone should ever ask of you." Over the next few weeks, the tutoring sessions became the highlight of Emma's week. Victoria would watch from a distance as Jim and Emma worked through increasingly complex problems, their heads bent together over papers filled with equations. But more importantly, she watched them talk about other things too. Jim told Emma stories about famous mathematicians, about their failures and struggles and eventual triumphs. He talked about how mathematics was beautiful not because it was easy, but because it was challenging. He treated Emma like a colleague, a fellow traveler in the world of abstract reasoning. Rather than a student to be molded or a prodigy to be displayed, Emma flourished under this attention. The listlessness that had characterized her weeks at home began to fade. She started drawing equations in her notebooks again, watching mathematics lectures online, even attempting problems that were beyond her current level just to see if she could figure them out. More than that, she started smiling again, laughing at Jim's dry humor, engaging with the world instead of withdrawing from it. Victoria noticed changes in Jim too. He arrived for sessions with more energy, more animation in his voice. He started mentioning other teaching techniques they could try, other mathematical concepts that might interest Emma. 6 weeks into the tutoring arrangement, Victoria received a call from Dr. Morrison. "Mrs. Chun, I have some unexpected news. A spot has opened up at the Gifted Academy. There was a family relocation and they're offering Emma immediate enrollment. It's exactly what we've been waiting for." Victoria should have been ecstatic. The Gifted Academy was perfect on paper. Small class sizes, individualized instruction, students who would be Emma's intellectual peers even if they were chronologically older. It was everything she'd been desperately seeking when she'd pulled Emma out of Westbrook. So why did she feel a strange reluctance instead of relief? "That's wonderful news," Victoria said, injecting enthusiasm into her voice. "When would she start?" "They're hoping for next Monday if possible. I know it's quick, but they rarely have openings mid-year. If you don't take this spot, it could be years before another one becomes available." After the call ended, Victoria sat in her office, staring out at the city's skyline. She should call Emma immediately, share the good news. She should start the enrollment paperwork and arrange for Emma to visit the campus. Instead, she found herself thinking about Jim's tutoring sessions, about the light that had returned to Emma's eyes, about the careful, patient way Jim had been rebuilding both Emma's confidence and his own. That evening, she told Emma about the academy over dinner. Emma's reaction was not what Victoria expected. Instead of excitement, Emma looked uncertain, almost distressed. "But what about Miss Porter?" Emma asked, pushing her food around her plate. If I go to a new school, will he still? We could arrange for sessions on weekends, Victoria offered, though she wasn't sure if Jim would agree to that. It won't be the same, Emma said quietly. And Mommy, what if the kids at this school are mean too? What if they think I'm weird even though they're supposed to be gifted like me? Victoria reached across the table and took Emma's hand. Sweetheart, this school is designed for kids like you. You'll have classmates who understand mathematics the way you do. You won't have to hide who you are. But I don't want to leave Mr. Porter, Emma said, and there were tears in her eyes now. He's the first person who ever made me feel like being good at math was okay, like I wasn't broken or strange, just different. What if I lose that? Victoria felt her heart clench in her eagerness to find the perfect educational solution. She'd overlooked the fact that Emma had already found something perfect. Not an institution or a program, but a person who understood her in a way that couldn't be replicated by even the best school in the world. Let me talk to Mr. Porter, Victoria said. We'll figure this out together. The next morning, Victoria asked Jim to arrive early for his session with Emma. She met him at the door, ushering him into her home office before Emma could see him. Jim looked concerned, clearly sensing that something had changed. Is Emma all right? He asked immediately. She's fine, Victoria assured him, but we need to talk. She explained about the gifted academy, about the unexpected opening, and the pressure to accept immediately. And then she explained Emma's reaction, her reluctance to lose their tutoring sessions. Jim was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The academy's a good school, finally said. Probably the best option for someone with Emma's ability. She should go, but she doesn't want to, Victoria said, and I'm not sure I want to force her. Jim, she's thriving with you in a way she hasn't with anyone else. Not Dr. Chun, not the specialists, not any of the other resources I've thrown at this problem. You've given her something none of them could. Jim shook his head. Mrs. Chun, Victoria, I'm just one person. I can't give Emma everything she needs. She needs peers, structure, a comprehensive educational program. I'm a stopgap measure at best. What if you're not? Victoria pressed. What if you're exactly what she needs? Not a school or a program, but someone who sees her as a whole person, not just a mathematical prodigy to be optimized. Jim stood up, pacing to the window. You're asking me to take on more responsibility than I'm comfortable with? The 1-month trial was supposed to be limited, manageable. If Emma doesn't go to the academy, if she stays home and I'm her primary mathematics instructor, that's a much bigger commitment. That's me accepting that I'm responsible for her educational development. And given my history, I don't know if I can carry that weight. Victoria saw the fear in his posture, the way he was already preparing to retreat, but she also saw something else. In the 6 weeks he'd been working with Emma, Jim had slowly been coming back to life. The guilt that had driven him into exile was still there, but it no longer seemed to define him completely. He'd found a purpose again, tentative and fragile, but real. What happened to your student? Victoria said quietly. The one who hurt himself. Is he okay now? Jim turned away from the window, surprise evident on his face. How did you ... I did some research. Called some contacts at Phillips Academy. They wouldn't give me details, but they confirmed there was an incident. Jim sat down heavily, his shoulders sagging. His name was Michael. He's in his 20s now, doing well from what I hear. Got through the crisis, received proper mental health support, went on to college. He's a software engineer, not a math. He found a path that worked for him, one that didn't involve the constant pressure of academic achievement. So he survived, Victoria said gently. He made it through. And that's at least partly because he had people who cared enough to notice when things went wrong and get him help. I noticed too late, Jim said, his voice raw with old pains. But you noticed, Victoria insisted, and you cared enough that when things went wrong, you blamed yourself so thoroughly that you gave up everything. Jim, that kind of conscience, that level of care for your students' well-being, that's exactly what Emma needs. Not someone who sees only her potential, but someone who sees all of her, including her vulnerability. The doorbell rang. The sound of Emma being dropped off by Victoria's driver from an errand to the bookstore. They heard her footsteps in the hallway, her voice calling out for her mother. Think about it, Victoria said quietly. You don't have to decide right now. Jim, you're helping her. Not just with mathematics, but with everything. You're showing her that her gifts don't have to be a burden. That's worth more than any prestigious school could offer. Jim didn't respond, but Victoria saw the conflict in his eyes. She left him in the office and went to greet Emma, giving him time to compose himself. When she brought Emma to the dining room for their session, Jim was already there, his expression carefully neutral, his teaching materials laid out on the table. The session proceeded normally, or at least it appeared to. Victoria watched from the kitchen, ostensibly preparing lunch, but actually observing the two of them work together. She saw the easy rapport they'd developed. The way Emma would furrow her brow in concentration and Jim would wait patiently, never rushing her, never making her feel inadequate when she struggled. She saw Emma laugh at one of Jim's deliberately terrible mathematical puns. She saw Jim's face light up when Emma made a conceptual breakthrough. Genuine pride and joy radiating from him. This was teaching, Victoria realized. Not the formal, institutionalized version with curricula and assessments and standardized outcome. This was the ancient, intimate version. A master and an apprentice. A relationship built on mutual respect and genuine care. How could she give this up for the sterile promise of a perfect school? Midway through the session, Emma pushed a paper toward Jim. I've been working on something, she said, unusually shy. It's a proof. I tried to work out why the Pythagorean theorem is always true. I know there are lots of proofs already, but I wanted to make my own. Jim picked up the paper, his expression curious. Victoria watched as he read through Emma's work, his eyebrows rising higher with each line. When he finished, he set the paper down carefully, almost reverently, and looked at Emma with an expression Victoria couldn't quite decipher. Emma, this is remarkable. Did you develop this approach yourself? Emma nodded. Is it wrong? I know it's probably been done before. It's not wrong, Jim said slowly. And yes, this general approach has been used before, but not with this specific method. This middle section here where you use the rotational property, that's genuinely novel. At least I've never seen it presented quite this way. Really? Emma's face lit up with pride and disbelief. Really, Jim confirmed. Emma, do you understand what this means? You didn't just solve a problem or learn a concept. You created new mathematics. Original thinking. That's what real mathematicians do. Victoria saw tears spring to Emma's eyes, but they were happy tears. I made something new. Nobody else thought of it exactly this way? Not that I know of, Jim said gently. And Emma, that's extraordinary. You're not just learning mathematics, you're beginning to create it. After the session ended and Emma had run upstairs to add her proof to her special notebook, Jim remained at the dining table, staring at Emma's work. Victoria brought him a cup of coffee and sat down across from him. That was something special, wasn't it? She said. Jim nodded slowly. Mrs. Chun, I've taught hundreds of students over the years. Bright kids, brilliant kids, prodigies. But what Emma just did, that level of creative mathematical thinking in an 8-year-old, I've only seen it maybe twice before in my entire career. And one of those was Michael, Victoria guessed. Yes, Jim admitted. Michael had that same spark, that ability to see mathematics not as a set of rules to memorize, but as a language to speak creatively. It's what made teaching him so exhilarating and ultimately so devastating when he fell apart. But Emma's not Michael, Victoria said softly. She's her own person with her own strengths and vulnerabilities. Can't protect her from every possible harm by refusing to teach her. You can only be present, be aware, and be ready to adjust if you see warning signs. Jim picked up Emma's proof again, studying it with an expression that was equal parts wonder and fear. If I do this, if I take on primary responsibility for her mathematics education, I need your absolute promise that you'll tell me immediately if you see any signs that she's struggling emotionally. Any signs at all. Withdrawal, anxiety, perfectionism, anything. You have my promise, Victoria said. And Jim, I'll be monitoring constantly. Not because I don't trust you, but because I'm her mother and I'm terrified too. We're both going to be watching out for her. What about her social development? Jim asked. If she's not in school, how does she interact with peers? We'll figure it out, Victoria said. Maybe there are mathematics circles or clubs where gifted kids meet. Maybe we can arrange playdates with other families from Dr. Morrison's network. Maybe Emma needs different kinds of friends for different parts of her life. Social peers her own age for play and emotional connection, intellectual peers for mathematical discussion. It doesn't all have to come from one place. Jim was quiet for a long time, clearly wrestling with the decision. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Okay, I'll do it. But Victoria, the moment I feel like I'm in over my head, the moment I see any warning signs that Emma's struggling with the pressure, I'm out. I can't go through what I went through with Michael again. Fair enough, Victoria agreed. She felt relief flood through her, mixed with trepidation. They were taking a risk, building Emma's education around one man's ability to teach her while protecting his own wounded psyche. It was unconventional, possibly unwise, but it felt right in a way that no institutional solution ever had. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the doorway of her dining room watching a scene that had become beautifully routine. Emma sat across from Jim, both of them bent over a particularly challenging topology problem, their faces showing identical expressions of concentrated fascination. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting golden light across the papers scattered between them. It was a Tuesday, one of Jim's regular teaching days, and Victoria had arranged her schedule to be home for these sessions whenever possible. The changes in Emma over the past months had been profound. Her confidence had blossomed. She no longer saw her mathematical abilities as something shameful or strained, but as a natural part of who she was, like having brown eyes or being left-handed. She'd started attending a weekly mathematics circle for gifted children where she'd found, not friends exactly, at least peers who spoke her language. She still sometimes felt lonely, still struggled with being different from other 8-year-olds. But she'd learned that different didn't mean wrong. The changes in Jim had been equally remarkable. He'd started working part-time as a janitor instead of full-time, freeing up more hours for teaching Emma. But more than that, the haunted look that had characterized his expression when Victoria first met him had faded. He smiled more easily now, laughed more freely. He was letting himself believe again that he had something valuable to offer, that his gift for teaching wasn't a dangerous liability but something precious. Victoria had changed too. She'd restructured her role at Chun Technologies, delegating more responsibility to her executive team and working fewer hours. hours. She'd discovered that the company didn't collapse without her constant presence. In fact, it thrived, her team stepping up in ways they never had when she'd been micromanaging every decision. And she'd discovered something more important, the joy of being present for her daughter's childhood, of witnessing these small daily miracles of learning and growth. "Look at this," Emma said suddenly, her voice excited. "If we rotate the figure this way and then fold it along this axis, we can see that the surfaces are actually equivalent even though they look completely different." Jim leaned closer, studying Emma's diagram. His face broke into a wide smile. "Emma, that's brilliant. You just proved something that took me 3 weeks to understand when I was studying topology in graduate school. How did you see that so quickly?" Emma shrugged, but Victoria could see the pride in her daughter's face. "I don't know. I just sort of felt like it had to be true. And then when I tried to prove it, it worked." Jim sat back in his chair, shaking his head in wonder. "That's mathematical intuition, Emma, that ability to sense the truth of something before you can prove it. That's the mark of a real mathematician. Not someone who just calculates, but someone who understands the deep structure of mathematical reality." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes as she watched this exchange. It wasn't the first time she'd cried during one of these sessions. There was something about watching Jim nurture Emma's gifts with such care and patience, about seeing her daughter thrive under this attention, that moved Victoria in ways she hadn't expected. Jim glanced up and caught Victoria's eye. He must have seen something in her expression because he stood up. "Emma, why don't you take a break? Go get a snack or work on that problem set we talked about. I need to speak with your mother for a moment." After Emma had bounded out of the room, Jim walked over to where Victoria stood in the doorway. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Victoria wiped at her eyes, laughing at herself. "I'm fine. I'm just," she paused, searching for the right words, "just grateful for you, for what you're doing for Emma, for what you've given back to both of us." Jim's expression softened. "Victoria, I should be thanking you. 6 months ago, I was hiding from myself, from my past, from everything I used to love. You and Emma gave me a reason to stop hiding. You reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place." They were interrupted by Emma's voice calling from the kitchen. "Mr. Porter, can you help me? I'm trying to visualize a 4-dimensional hypercube and my brain is getting tangled." Jim smiled. "Duty calls. But Victoria, there's something I've been meaning to tell you." He hesitated, seeming uncertain. "I reached out to Michael's parents a few weeks ago. The student I told you about. The one who got hurt. I needed to face that part of my past instead of just running from it." Victoria felt her breath catch. "What happened?" "They invited me to lunch," Jim said, his voice thick with emotion, "and Michael came too. We talked for hours. He told me that what happened wasn't my fault, that he'd been struggling with depression and anxiety that had nothing to do with mathematics or my teaching. He said I was actually one of the people who helped him survive that time, not one of the people who caused it. He thanked me." Jim's eyes were shining with tears now. "For 3 years I've been carrying this guilt, this certainty that I'd destroyed this kid's life with my ambitions for him. And it turned out that he never blamed me. He remembered me as someone who believed in it, made him feel valued. All this time I've been punishing myself for something he'd forgiven me 4 years ago." Victoria reached out and squeezed Jim's hand. "Does that mean you can forgive yourself?" Jim laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "I'm working on it. Teaching Emma has helped. Every day that she thrives, every time I see her excited about mathematics instead of crushed by it, I feel a little more of that guilt lift. You gave me that gift, Victoria. You trusted me when I didn't trust myself." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Emma's voice called out again, more insistent this time. "Mr. Porter, seriously, I need help with this hypercube. My brain is breaking." Jim squeezed Victoria's hand back and then headed toward the kitchen, leaving Victoria alone with her thoughts. She walked to the dining table and looked at the papers scattered there, Emma's handwriting mixing with Jim's, equations and diagrams that Victoria still couldn't fully understand despite months of watching these sessions. But she didn't need to understand the mathematics to see what was happening here. This was more than education. This was healing for both Jim and Emma. Later that evening, after Jim had left and Emma was in bed, Victoria sat in her home office, working on a project she'd been developing for weeks. She'd been researching, making calls, pulling together resources. Now she was ready to present her idea. The next morning, she called Jim and asked him to come by without Emma. He arrived looking concerned, clearly worried that something had gone wrong. Victoria led him to her office and gestured for him to sit. "Jim, I have a proposition for you," Victoria began. "Over the past 6 months, you've proven something I suspected from the beginning. You're not just a good teacher. You're an extraordinary one, with a gift for connecting with gifted children in ways that traditional educators can't replicate." Jim looked uncomfortable. "Victoria, if this is about increasing my hours with Emma, I'm not sure I'm ready for that." "It's not about Emma," Victoria said. "Well, not just about Emma." She pulled out a folder and opened it. "I've been working with Dr. Morrison and several other specialists in gifted education. We want to create a program, a small academy for profoundly gifted children in mathematics. 5 to 10 students. Individually tailored instruction, emphasis on emotional well-being alongside intellectual development, and we want you to run it." Jim stared at her, shock written across his face. "Victoria, I can't. I'm a janitor who tutors 1 kid. I'm not qualified to run an academy." "You're the most qualified person I know," Victoria countered. "You understand these children in a way that no one else does. You know how to challenge them without crushing them, how to nurture their gifts without turning them into performing monkeys. That's exactly what these kids. She pulled out more doc. I've secured funding. I have a location identified, a small building near the university district. Dr. Morrison has already identified several families with profoundly gifted children who are desperate for exactly what we're proposing. This could be real, Jim. This could be your redemption, not just teaching one child, but creating a model for how we support the most exceptional young minds. Jim picked up the documents, his hands trembling slightly as he flipped through the business plan, the educational philosophy statements, the preliminary enrollment list. Victoria, he paused, searching for words. This is extraordinary, but I'm terrified. What if I fail again? Then we adjust and try something different, Victoria said firmly. Jim, you're never going to be able to guarantee that nothing will go wrong. That's not how working with humans, especially young humans, operates. But you can promise to be present, to be aware, and to prioritize their well-being alongside their intellectual development. That's all anyone can do. Jim set down the papers and looked at Victoria with an expression of wonder and fear mixed together. Why are you doing this? It's not just about Emma anymore. Because you gave me back my daughter, Victoria said, her voice breaking. 6 months ago, Emma was dying inside, slowly suffocating under the weight of being different. You brought her back to life. You showed her that her gifts were something beautiful instead of something shameful. How could I not want to give that same gift to other children? How could I not want to give you the chance to do what you were clearly born to do? Jim's eyes filled with tears. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he turned back to Victoria, his face wet, but his expression resolute. Okay, he said quietly. Let's do it. Let's build something beautiful for these kids. But Victoria, I need you to be part of it too. Not just as a funder, but as a partner. These children need advocates like you, parents who understand that their kids are whole people, not just brains to be optimized. Victoria felt tears stream down her own face now, tears of joy and relief and hope. Deal, she said. We'll build it together. They stood in her office, CEO and janitor, mother and teacher. Two broken people who'd found healing through an extraordinary child and her impossible gift. Outside the window, the city went about its business. Millions of people pursuing their ordinary lives. But in this room, something extraordinary was beginning. A small revolution in how society understood and nurtured its most exceptional children. It wasn't about pushing them to achieve or turning them into commodities. It was about seeing them, really seeing them, and creating space for them to grow into whoever they were meant to become. That's impossible, Victoria had said 6 months ago when she'd first discovered Emma's gift. But impossible, she'd learned, was just another word for something that hadn't been done yet. Something that required courage and vision and the willingness to build something new from the broken pieces of the past. As she looked at Jim, at the hope and determination on his face, Victoria knew they were about to prove that the impossible was just the beginning.